The rope was already around Samuel Carter's neck when his 8-year-old daughter came, running into the courthouse yard. "Stop!" Her small voice disappeared beneath the angry crowd. Samuel stood on the wooden platform with his hands tied behind his back. Dust covered his boots, and blood stained the corner of his shirt, where the sheriff's men had beaten him during the arrest. Above him, the noose swayed in the hot August wind. Sheriff Elias Boone looked at the little girl and hardened his face. "Take her away." But the girl did not move. Her name was Clara Carter, and she had spent the last 3 nights searching for proof that her father was innocent. "You have the wrong man," she said. Several men laughed. The sheriff did not. He had been told that Samuel Carter had robbed the Wells Fargo stage, killed a guard, and stolen $12,000. 2 witnesses had sworn they saw Samuel near the trail that night. The town wanted justice, but Clara knew something they did not. Her father had been home, and she had proof. 3 days earlier, Samuel Carter had been riding home from the northern pasture when Sheriff Boone arrested him outside Dry Creek. Samuel was a quiet ranch hand who kept to himself. He had no money, no powerful friends, and no reason to fight the sheriff's accusation. When Samuel saw his daughter standing outside the jail, his eyes filled with fear. Not for himself. For her. "Clara," he whispered, "go home." "I won't." "You have to. They're lying about you." The sheriff stepped between them. "Girl, your father was seen beside the stage road." Clara looked up at him. "By who?" Boone paused. "By 2 men. What were their names?" "That is none of your concern." Clara stared at him for a moment. Then she noticed something hanging from the sheriff's belt. A silver watch. Her father had once owned one exactly like it, but his had been stolen 2 years earlier. That night, Clara returned to the small cabin where she lived with her father. She searched every drawer, every box, and every old saddlebag. Her mother had died when Clara was 4, leaving behind very little. Near midnight, Clara found an old wooden box beneath her father's bed. Inside was a faded photograph. It showed Samuel standing beside 3 men. One was Sheriff Boone. The second was a wealthy ranch owner named Gideon Vale. The third man was someone Clara had never seen before. On the back of the photograph, her mother had written, "Some men smile while they sharpen the knife." Clara did not understand the words, but she understood one thing. Her father had known the sheriff before the sheriff became a lawman. The next morning, she went to the general store and asked old Mr. Harris if he remembered the stage robbery. The old storekeeper lowered his voice. "Everyone remembers it." "Did my father do it?" Harris looked toward the window. "No." Clara's heart stopped. "You know, I know Samuel wasn't the man I saw that night." "Who did you see?" Harris swallowed. "Gideon Vale's riders." Vale owned half the land around Dry Creek. His cattle filled the valley, and his money could buy silence from almost anyone. Clara ran home. But before she reached the cabin, she saw Gideon Vale's black horse standing beside the jail. She hid behind a fence. Through the open window, she heard Vale speaking. "You promised this would be finished." Sheriff Boone answered quietly. "It will be." "And the money?" "Safe." Clara covered her mouth. Then Vale said something that made her blood turn cold. "Once Carter is gone, the northern ranch becomes mine." Clara knew then that the hanging was not about a stage robbery. It was about her home. Her father owned a small piece of land beside the river. It was worthless to most people, but Vale had discovered that a new railroad line would soon pass nearby. If he owned Samuel's land, he could sell it for a fortune. Clara needed proof. That afternoon, she returned to the jail carrying a basket of bread. The sheriff allowed her inside. Samuel looked exhausted. "Daddy," she whispered, "did you know Sheriff Boone?" Samuel stared at the floor. "Yes." "Did you know Gideon Vale?" "Yes." "Then tell me the truth." Samuel closed his eyes. Years ago, Boone and Vale worked cattle together. They weren't good men. They stole from travelers. I left them when I found out what they were doing. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because your mother was afraid." Vale threatened her. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you fight him?" "Because sometimes a man thinks keeping quiet will protect his family." He looked at his daughter. "I was wrong." Clara reached through the bars and held his hand. "You're not dying." Samuel smiled sadly. "You're a brave girl." "I know." For the first time, he laughed. That evening, Clara went to the old church outside town. She remembered something her mother had once told her. If grown men refuse to listen, find the people who remember. Inside the church, Clara found Reverend Thomas. She showed him the photograph. The old preacher studied it for a long time. "I remember that night," he said. "What night?" "The night your father left Vale." He walked to an old cabinet and removed a leather-bound church record. Inside was a handwritten note from Samuel, dated 17 years earlier. It described a robbery committed by Vale and Boone. But there was more. Attached to the note was a small brass key. "Your mother brought this to me," Reverend Thomas said. "She told me to keep it until someone needed the truth." Clara took the key. "Where does it go?" The preacher pointed toward the abandoned railway warehouse. The key opened a small iron box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were three things: a ledger, the missing stage money, and a letter bearing Sheriff Boone's signature. Clara could barely breathe. The ledger showed every payment Vale had made to Boone. The letter ordered Boone to arrest Samuel after the stage robbery. The sheriff had planned everything. Clara carried the evidence back toward town. But before she reached the courthouse, a horseman appeared behind her. It was Gideon Vale. "You have something that belongs to me," he said. Clara backed away. "I'm not giving it to you." Vale dismounted. "You're a child. You don't understand how the world works. I understand that you lied." His face changed. He reached for the ledger. Clara ran. She raced through the alleyways and burst into the courthouse yard just as the crowd gathered for Samuel's hanging. "Stop." She held the ledger above her head. Sheriff Boone stepped forward. "Give me that book." "No, you don't know what you're doing. I know you paid to kill my father." The crowd went silent. Vale arrived seconds later. Clara pointed at him. "He stole the stage money. The sheriff helped him. They blamed my father because they wanted our land." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Let me see that ledger." Clara handed it to Reverend Thomas, who had followed her. He opened it before everyone. Names, dates, amounts, payments. Everything was there. Sheriff Boone's face went pale. Vale drew his pistol. The crowd stepped back. But before he could raise it, Sheriff Boone grabbed his wrist. For 1 second, the two men stared at each other. "You're finished, Gideon," Boone said. Vale laughed bitterly. "You're finished too." He tried to pull free. Boone knocked the pistol into the dirt. The two men struggled until several ranchers rushed forward and restrained Vale. Then Boone turned toward Samuel. The sheriff slowly removed his badge. "I was going to let an innocent man die," he said. Samuel stared at him. "Why?" Boone's voice broke. "Because I was afraid of a richer man." No one spoke. Boone looked at Clara. "Your daughter saved your life." Samuel walked toward his little girl. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. Clara buried her face against his chest. "I told you they were wrong." Samuel held her tightly. "I know." Months later, the railroad surveyors arrived. Samuel's land became valuable just as Vale had feared, but Samuel refused to sell. Instead, he used the money from the recovered stage reward to repair the ranch. Clara planted wildflowers beside the cabin where her mother had once lived. Sheriff Boone resigned and later stood trial for his crimes. Gideon Vale lost his ranch, his fortune, and the respect he had spent years buying. As for Samuel, he never forgot the day. His daughter stood before a crowd of angry men and demanded the truth. One autumn evening, he sat beside Clara on the porch. The sun was sinking behind the distant hills. "You know," he said, "your mother always wanted you to be brave." Clara smiled. "Was I brave?" Samuel looked at her. "You were more than brave." He placed his old silver watch in her hand. The same watch she had seen on Boone's belt. "I thought I lost this forever," Clara said. "So did I." She looked toward the fields where the cattle moved beneath the golden sky. For years, Samuel had believed he had failed to protect his family. But that day he finally understood something. Sometimes a family is not saved by the strongest person. Sometimes it is saved by the smallest voice in the room, the one nobody expects to hear. And from that day on, whenever the people of Dry Creek told the story of Samuel Carter, they never called him the man who was almost hanged. They called him the father whose 8-year-old daughter stood against an entire town and made the truth impossible to bury.